all have your coffee. I see most of you have your coffee. So yeah, I'm Jen Weiss. I'm from the North Carolina Department of Transportation. I hope many of you have heard about the Clean Transportation Plan already. I'm going to go a little bit in depth into kind of what we're working on, where we are right now with it, what we're hoping to accomplish with it, how you all can get engaged in it. But what I'm really hoping is that this can kind of be an interactive discussion and hear from you all some of your questions, concerns, challenges, ideas. I think some of you may already be participating in the Clean Transportation Plan process, but just would love to get your feedback and input, even if you're not, because we really want to make sure this is a broad stakeholder engagement. All right, what am I doing wrong already? Let's see.
Probably nothing.
Oh, I had it upside down. Nope, I'm all good. I'm all good. So this should come as no surprise to folks, right? This is the recent greenhouse gas inventory that Department of Environmental Quality put out earlier this year. And you can see that transportation is now the #1 emitter of greenhouse gases in North Carolina, not somewhere where you want to be #1. And this is because the power sector, the electricity sector, has done great things in reducing emissions from the sector. And so you can see that electric generation went down 35% from the 2-year period that they had done the previous one. And so now the focus has turned to transportation. And as all of you know, transportation, when you start to electrify it, is very tied to the power sector. So this is something that we want to work on very closely with the electricity sector. As we start to electrify our fleets, we want to be thinking about how that affects the power sector and vice versa. So some of the conversations that we're having within the Clean Transportation Plan is exactly that. What is this interaction between the two different sectors? How do we work together to reduce emissions throughout the economy? Just a brief background, you probably already know this, but there were a couple executive orders that came out of Governor Cooper's office back in 2018 and then again in 2022, and both were very focused on reducing greenhouse gases across the economy. In 2018, Executive Order 80 had a focus on reducing economy-wide emissions by 40% over 2005 levels by 2025. It also set the first goal for zero-emission vehicles. Set a number of registered ZEVs to be at 40,000, or 40,000, I wish, 80,000 by 2025. Just to give you a little frame of reference, we're at about 42,000 right now. So we're on track to meet that goal. And then the state-owned buildings, Governor Cooper asked the state-owned buildings to take a look at their own use of energy and reduce that by 40%. Building off of that, in January of 2022, Governor Cooper stepped it up a notch in a couple different areas. One of them was economy-wide emissions. So now he's increased the goal to 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. He's really increased the number of zero-emission vehicles registered in the state. So now our goal is 1.25 million ZEVs by the end of 2030. So remember I said we're at 42,000 right now? We've got a little ways to go. And so this is something that we're all going to be working on together to figure out strategically, how do you do that? And then how do you build the grid infrastructure behind that in order to help people get to where they need to go? The third goal was new. This is a goal to increase the amount of ZEV sales so that 50% of all new vehicle sales are zero emission vehicles by 2030. This mimics some of the federal goals and targets that you're seeing coming, as well as a lot of the auto manufacturers are also coming up with goals that are similar to this. So these two are very tied together. Is that you need to have the availability of vehicles at different price points, different types of models in order to reach your 1.25 million goal. So it's heartening to me to see the auto manufacturers are also stepping up and saying, these are goals for us as well. We're going to make it happen too. So they're very tied together. And then the other thing that sorry, I forget my notes here. The other thing that Governor Cooper asked the Department of Transportation to do specifically was to develop a clean transportation plan. So recognizing that we are now the #1 emitter of greenhouse gases in the state, he thought it was important to turn attention to the transportation sector so that we can do a broad stakeholder engagement to figure out how are we going to reduce emissions in the sector? How are we going to increase awareness? How are we going to look at best practices that are happening around the world and bring some of those into North Carolina? And so the goal of the Clean Transportation Plan is to do a few things. One is to do just that, increase awareness. This is an issue. Here are some of the ideas. Come to us with things that you want to be working on, things that you think are important for our state. So through that, we're going to assess what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, what are the different considerations we need to be making as we're building an equitable, clean transportation future. And we're going to do it together. One thing I should stress is that this is not a Department of Transportation plan. We're facilitating the plan. This is a plan for North Carolina. And so we have very broad engagement right now. About over 250 people are engaged in the stakeholder process, bringing ideas to the table. Some of you in this room are also engaged, so thank you for that. And our focus is going to be on developing near-term solutions. So we've been talking about it for a little bit. We've got ideas that are out there. It's time now to kind of roll up our sleeves and say, here's what we think we need to do in the state. It's not enough for us to say we need to do a study. In 2 years, we'll figure it out. We need to figure it out now, right? The time is now to be figuring this out. And so we're going to be very focused on developing these near-term strategies that we think are impactful and can be done, very feasible here in the state. And then we're going to develop accountability metrics around it. How do we measure success? How do we know that we're going to be successful? We obviously have a few goals that came from Governor Cooper's office, but there's other goals that we can put together as a group, as a state. So what are those goals? What are we trying to accomplish, and how are we going to measure that success? Timeline. Governor Cooper gave us 15 months to put together the Clean Transportation Plan. We kicked it off in January, which puts us at the beginning of April 2023. So we are a good ways in already. 15 months, as you know, goes very quickly. We have already done a public information session, which was a very large group. It was a virtual event. And we invited people just to learn more about the Clean Transportation Plan. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's how you can get engaged. Then we kicked off work groups, and I'm going to talk about the work groups in just a second. There's 5 of them that are designed to have subject matter experts come to the table, roll up their sleeves, come with ideas, and really start to have the discussion around what can we do here in North Carolina. So those groups kicked off in May, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the discussions we've already had with the work groups. The work groups are putting together action plans. So there'll be 5 action plans, 1 for each of the work groups, which will have these near-term solutions in there. What are the things that we're going to be accomplishing or would we like to accomplish? And then we'll take all of those recommendations in the action plans and roll them up into the Clean Transportation Plan, the broader Clean Transportation Plan. Send it out to the public to get public comment, and then give it to the governor by the beginning of April. You'll see there's a couple other public information sessions in here. Like I said, I want this to be very broad. I want people to be engaged in it, but we recognize that not everyone can participate in the work groups. A lot of people don't have the time. Maybe some people feel they don't have the expertise, but we want people to be engaged. And so we'll be doing these public information sessions along the way. And then we'll also be doing things like this, coming to specific groups that are already having events and talking with you all about what are your ideas, what are your challenges, what are the things that are on your mind. So I thank you again, Bill, for inviting me to this, because this is really helpful as we start to design the plan. So I mentioned the 5 work groups. I don't know if 2 people in the back can see it. If you have eyes like mine, you probably can't. So I will read them to you. But the 5 work groups are light duty zero emission vehicles, medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles, fleet transitions, vehicle miles traveled, and clean transportation infrastructure. And just a little detail on each of these. These were all things that were already happening in the state. So we're building off of existing workflows and things that had already been happening. But what we've done is combine maybe different groups that were talking about things so that we're all talking about them together. So the light duty ZEV is building off of the ZEV plan that came out of Executive Order 80, which was done in 2019. It had about 20 different recommendations in there for how we could make the transition to light duty zero emission vehicles. We're going to brush those off a little bit. Some of them have been done, some of them not so much. We're going to look at them again and say, are these really the priorities that we want to have? Are there other things we want to be working on? How do we really make this transition to zero emission vehicles in the passenger, so the light duty trucks and cars? This could include vehicle availability and consumer education. It could include financing and incentives. It could include a multitude of other things. And then the parallel group to that is obviously the medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles. These are your larger trucks and vehicles. This builds off of a memorandum of understanding that Governor Cooper signed in July of 2020, which sets some targets and goals for the transition of the medium and heavy duty fleet. So we're going to include those goals in the work that the work group does. We're going to take a close look at the impacted communities. There's a lot of groups around warehouses or heavily traveled freight areas that maybe are getting the detrimental effects of air pollution. So we want to be hearing them, listening to them. What are the issues? What are the challenges that you have, so that when we're making the transition, it's including their needs as well. And I should have mentioned this at the very beginning. This is not just a zero emission vehicle plan, the Clean Transportation Plan. It includes other alternative fuels. So if there are other alternative fuels, propane, hydrogen, compressed natural gas, whatever the new thing might be, whatever it is that fleets are looking to transition to, we want to make sure that we're including that type of fuel as well. So as long as it's a no emission or low emission fuel, it will be included in the Clean Transportation Plan. The fleet transition is kind of similar to this because it includes a lot of the same vehicles, but this is specifically focused on our large fleets. So this could be the state fleets, this could be local government fleets, this could be any of your fleets at your organizations, it could be school buses, transit buses. We just want to be looking at these large groups and how do you start to transition over, looking at the timing of replacement and the cost and the incentives in order to do that. The fourth group's a little bit different, but very important, vehicle miles traveled reduction. You all know about energy efficiency, right? So the less energy used in the first place, the less miles traveled in the first place, the less emissions that are emitted to begin with. And so we want to look for different ways that we can reduce the number of miles that we even travel in our vehicles. So that could include rail, that could include trains, that could include biking or pedestrian or better walkways. So this group is going to be looking at all these different alternatives to transition people over to a non-vehicle type of world. And the last one obviously is really important, and this one might be the most important to all of you, is the clean transportation infrastructure, especially in the electric sector. You know, how do you build out this EV charging infrastructure so it helps people get from point A to point B, but how do you do it in a way that doesn't really disrupt the grid and increase costs, right? So this is something I know you've all been talking about probably for a very long time, but specifically here in this workshop that you put together. And so I'd be interested in kind of your thoughts and what you're hearing and what you're thinking about within your organizations as we start to think about building out this infrastructure, especially the fast charging and the medium and heavy duty infrastructure. Quickly, I mentioned that we had already had one work group meeting, and so I wanted to just show you guys, and I'm not going to go through all of these, wanted to show you some of the things that were coming out of the first breakout session we had at the beginning of May. So when we got together, it was a virtual meeting. We had a little bit of an intro, and then each of the work groups broke off into little breakout rooms, virtual breakout rooms, and started to talk about a few things. One of them was, what are the challenges that you're seeing within this work group, within this topic? What are some of the potential solutions that you're hearing about that you specifically are thinking about? And then how do we measure success within this group? What is going to make us look like we've accomplished what we are aiming to accomplish? And so within the light duty group, a couple of things that I wanted to point out is this is really a lot of the conversation was around public awareness. This, you know, not quite understanding what an electric vehicle is, or I know I'm just used to my internal combustion engine. I don't need an electric vehicle. I'm good. Thank you. So a lot of awareness about what electric vehicles are and you know, how people can think about them a little bit differently is important. The upfront cost obviously is very important to people. And so just getting through, like, what are the different incentives that we might need to be offering to help people to make the transition. And then the other thing that you'll notice here is the coordination between transportation and utility sectors. Again, I think this is a really important component, and it's on people's minds about how, as you're building out the infrastructure, how do you build out the grid at the same time? From the potential solutions, a couple that really jumped out to me. The used ZEV and hybrid market I thought was really interesting, especially because of the supply chain issues that we're having today. A lot of people mentioned it's really hard to even find an electric vehicle today. So we turn to look to used vehicles, which there aren't that many of them right now anyway, but this is a way to try to make the cars more affordable and make people start to think a little bit more about them. So that's going to be a focus of this group. Public education is obviously going to be a focus of this group. Thinking through rebate structures, incentives. You know, how do you encourage people to try out these vehicles? And then finally, definitions of success. I don't know where the NASCAR features EVs came from, but apparently that would be a really good way for us to talk about EVs. So, you know, we'll be giving them a call. But I thought that was fine. So people came up with all sorts of ideas. On the medium heavy duty, a couple of things that you'll notice here. This is very pertinent to this group. You know, the grid capacity and the charging infrastructure. You know, these vehicles are going to be require a lot more energy to charge them, especially if you want to do it quickly, right? And so I know you all are thinking through, what does this do to the grid? What does this do to your operations? And this will be a conversation we can continue to have as we start to build out the infrastructure for them. And then supply chain shortages and lead times, especially in this market. I mean, there's not a lot of vehicles today in the medium and heavy duty. There's more and more coming each day, but you know, as the supply chain is making things take longer, you know, there's not going to be as many new buses, new trucks, new delivery vehicles out there. And so that's a consideration as we're starting to advance how we're going to do this transition over. And then for the potential solutions, Recognizing that the infrastructure for medium heavy duty is different than the light duty vehicles, and what does that look like? I think that's going to be an important component to this. Coming up with different creative funding solutions to make this transition, especially for local governments, for school school districts. You know, they're not used to paying the extra amount for these larger trucks. So how do you help to finance this to make it something that they'd be able to afford? And then a really important component obviously is the transit and school bus electrification. As we're looking to replace those buses, how do we do that in a coordinated manner? One of the things I should call out for definitions of success is just to recognize that our urban markets are different than our rural markets. And so as we're developing strategies, they might need to be different in each of those areas. Another thing I'd love to hear a little bit more from all of you about. And then the vehicle miles traveled group. So this group is obviously just a little bit different because we're reducing the vehicle miles. So this is trying to get through some of the challenges of the focus on cars. People automatically jump in their cars to go where they need to go, even if it's a mile down the road. So how do you start to help people think through different ways that they can get to where they need to go without jumping in their car? Providing rural alternatives was a huge one, because the way that you make trips when you're in a rural environment where things are further away is a lot different than when you're in an urban environment. So we need to look at strategies that are going to be a little different, again, for rural versus urban. And then I think this auto-centric land use policies is in this group really focused on, you know, using land wisely and using it in a way that makes our travel and our transportation features much more effective and efficient. Potential solutions, looking at all the different modes that might be available. Electric bikes and electric scooters were a really big topic of conversation, which was interesting. So that might be one of the ways that we start to transition over. Integrated land use with alternative travel modes. Again, like I said, it's going to be an important component to this. And behavior change. I think that's probably one of the big ones, is just making people aware that, you know, these are really good ways to get to where you need to go, and you don't need to jump in the car. And then in terms of definitions of success, public awareness of the costs of driving, perhaps maybe you could use that to help you measure that you're successful. And then for the fleet transition, I think I mentioned this before, the timing of the fleet turnover is really important here, because there's, you know, certain set, especially in for school buses and transit buses, a set schedule for when they're going to be replaced. And so we need to be getting into the areas as soon as we can to talk about replacing it with an electric or an alternative fuel vehicle instead of diesel. And then confidence in vehicle performance. As I said, you know, they're coming out with new models all the time, but it's building that confidence, that awareness that this new type of technology will actually work to help for whatever the need is of the company. Again, potential solutions include utility coordination, which is making sure that they have the ability to charge these vehicles in a way that they can do it quickly and easily, especially for buses, get them back out on the road. And then I like the bulk purchase coordination. I think this might be a way for us to reduce costs by buying in bulk for some of the different types of vehicles that we've been needing to do. Definition of success, yes, the implementation, widespread education, other good things there. And then finally, the clean transportation infrastructure. You know, this is very tied to utility grid, the capital costs of doing this. You know, what are the timelines? How do you maintain this infrastructure once you put it in? Just a whole bunch of questions around just the deployment and the installation of this infrastructure. Tax incentives were something people thought might be a solution. Building code updates to make sure that every new building has the capacity and the capability to do charging. And then clean energy solutions and public rights of way to kind of, if there's, you know, some sort of a reason that you can't enhance the grid, coming up with clean energy solutions, batteries, renewable energy in order to make it happen. And then finally, the definitions of success here are, you know, maybe making sure that we have equitable access for all to the charging infrastructure, and that there's ease and predictability in the EV charging network. I thought I had one more. I don't. Well, the one thing that I wanted to mention was that we have to different cross-cutting areas that we're going to be considering within each of our work groups. And so the work groups are actually meeting today to discuss equitable access and education and outreach. Those are two specific themes that we want them to be thinking about when they come up with their recommendations. And so this week, all 5 of the work groups are meeting to talk about those 2 themes. The next month, when we meet again, we'll be talking about incentives and financing and what does that mean to each of the work groups. Economic and workforce development, we think that's a really strong component of everything that we're doing in the electric vehicle transition. So what type of training might all of our people in North Carolina need? And how do we think about economic development? How do we bring new companies into the state as part of this? And then the last 2 groups that we'll be talking about are health impacts and then what type of policies and regulatory changes might be needed in order to make all of this happen. That is all I have. Do I